Welcome to another episode of our podcast, Men from Mars on Film. Today we have with us author David Bullock, a space and geographic information science professional writer, to discuss his new book released on Amazon entitled 2008-2018, A NewSpace Primer. David has been writing about space for 14 years and first published Space Lifestyle magazine. He later began working for the NewSpace intelligence website, NewSpace Global. Thank you for joining us, David.
You're welcome.
Maybe you can give us a brief introduction about your book and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, let me start a little bit about myself. So I became interested in space. As a kid, but really didn't seek to do that professionally until early in my career. I interned a few places. I worked some entry-level jobs, and I was living in New York. And then I had a friend of mine that went to business school, and he's like, "You're a smart guy. You're in New York doing all these entry-level jobs. Why don't you go for a master's and do something better?" So I went to the University of North Dakota, got a master's in space studies, and decided that I was going to do space and science writing from there. So one of the things I learned from the University of North Dakota was geographic information science. And so after starting Space Lifestyle magazine in about 2006, and it lasted until about 2009, I decided that I was going to go back to New York and start fresh again. And so I went back to New York, got a degree in geographic information science, which is something I knew from my space studies days. And I was working for NewSpace Global at the time. There was a break in work, and eventually I worked for NewSpace Global. And there I started as a writer. And after being a writer, I moved on to being an analyst. And yeah, I'm still with the company as of this point. The thing is, though, is there was a lag with NewSpace Global when they weren't fully operational. I was looking for stuff to do, and it was by that time, after 2 master's degrees, I was like, David, you're in a position after writing all these papers that you could probably write a book yourself. So I wrote 2008-2018, A NewSpace Primer, and that's how that book came into being. So I that might sound like, oh, well, you just had free time and there's no experience or whatever. But if anything, like, it falls back on my previous history as a journalist and as a writer, that I didn't put a purpose, or I didn't try to find a reason that would be conspiratorial or underhanded or subversive to write the book. I really wrote it because I needed something to do, and it was going to follow up on everything that I did on Space Lifestyle magazine and everything I was doing at NewSpace Global. So so that's how it happened. And I also, most of the book is not quoted from me. I actually interviewed 13 people, and a lot of that material of the book and the content of the book comes from quotes from them. So I kept it that same sort of magazine style that I wrote in Space Lifestyle magazine, and tried to make it just into a bigger book where you would hear the voices of the professionals more so than mine.
Now, I want to talk more about the book and some other of your writings, but can you just tell us a little bit about how a kid growing up in Bay Bridge, Brooklyn, New York, became infatuated with space?
It was just the time. Like, I was born in 1974, so this was like at post-Apollo, and there was just talk about space. But even, like, to be honest, like back in Bay Ridge, people were even talking about the commercialization of space. I was just talking, I think, to you, Tanya, the last time we talked, that the whole concept of Arianespace being the first commercial provider of launch vehicles. That was something that growing up in Brooklyn, people talked about, and to be honest, really envied, because the US wasn't first, and it wasn't about the whole US rushing, because I was born in the Cold War. So like like everything usually revolving around space at that time was like US and Russia. But there was also that third element of Europe, like coming up with the first commercial, company, privately held company on space, right, on launch vehicle providers. So there's that kind of dialogue always flowed around the air, but this was also before the internet. I think it really wasn't until the internet took full course that I really, and actually after getting involved in academia, undergrad, that I really got involved with absorbing a lot of information on space. And the information on space back in the Cold War is nothing compared to what we have now. There's so much out there. There's so many resources that we could tap into. And to have a career, not only as a writer, but as an engineer or some other space professional is really a whole lot easier now than it was before.
You just mentioned previously in your introduction about all the research that you did, and that you spoke with many notable players in the commercial space economy. Many of those you interviewed may have had a history themselves, right? I know in the introduction, you gave a long list of names that kind of set standards in the commercial space, new space industry, would you say?
Yeah, I mean, setting standards is a loose term too. I mean, since everything is new and I would say since 2004 with the winning of the NSR X Prize Cup, that was a setting of a standard, and everybody who came from that, who was involved in the industry, set standards then too. So now the industry is like, there's this talk about whether should we call it new space anymore? Like, is it really just all space? And I think that I think a lot of the people that I interviewed set standards. One place where I think they haven't set standards was in law. I've only interviewed one person in law, and she is one of very, very few people that does commercial law on either a federal or a local level. International law is usually the dominant area of space. Before, now that we have spaceports throughout America, that has changed. So there's even more local law that has introduced itself amongst all these ports. So I would say that the standards that come out from this group, the whole VC system, like with venture capital, that originally, those standards with VC and what expected from a company actually comes from the tech industry. So what the tech industry has done has paralleled a lot to what VCs expect when they invest in the space industry. So if there are standards like that are, and I'm using that term loosely, it's not like it's a law or a policy, it's just what's expected of when entering the industry. I would agree in saying that the group that I interviewed set a lot of those standards, but at the same time, there were standards set, like talking about the tech industry, there were standards set beforehand even so. And even like with just working with NASA, well, NASA's changed so much. So working with NASA has been easier, but to get agreements with them, there's been standards set by them as well. And I didn't interview anyone from NASA. People who formerly worked from NASA I interviewed, but no one who was working for NASA at the time. So, and I've interviewed NASA representatives before for other articles, but not for this book.
Okay. So would you say that the new space industry, in a way, has set some new standards?
Yeah. How would I describe that? So, the whole concept of that space is slow, that it's going to take a while for your business to get off the ground and running. I don't think that exists anymore. That was a Cold War standard. That was, we're going to take time. The Russians are going to take even more time. Space is slow. That when the company, when there was lots of movement, when Spaceport America, before Spaceport America was built, like the whole X Prize Cup era, space was slower then, but it, like, since then, especially with the advent of CubeSats and the CubeSat industry, has gotten a lot faster.
Okay. So we'll go on to the next question. Will you share some of the stories that you talked about in the book? You highlight a brief history of commercial space in each chapter. I would like to talk about a few of those chapters and the behind the scenes stories. Can you share a few with our listeners? Some highlights from a couple of chapters, namely chapter number 4, More Space Shuttle, and chapter number 5, Space Stations.
So those two chapters are really focused a lot on NASA. And with the space shuttle, I did talk, and this is not quotes from other people, but my quotes is that the U.S. went through a change. Everything was so reliant on the space shuttle, and then we had to really look at it to find out if it was really safe anymore. And a lot of the study that I did in my master's degree really looked not only with risk analysis, but also with policy, looked at how the shuttle was safe, and how NASA worked as an institution, as a highly reliable organization, which is basically a description for a large company that is dependent on. So a hospital can be considered a highly reliable organization. So, but the way NASA worked for both the Challenger and the Columbia launches, where there was an accident and eventually fatalities, they were working against what Diane Vaughn called in her book on the Challenger a normalization of deviance. So what they were doing is they were taking something that was out of place, which was, flying during conditions, for at least the Challenger, conditions that were too cold, and they were like, oh, we're going to do it anyway despite what's going on. We think everything is good, so we're going to just go ahead. And it's taking the deviance, saying that, normally you wouldn't fly during that time, but we're going to give a go ahead despite that time. And that was made by management within one of the NASA contractors. So at least according to Diane's book. So that was determined for that launch. And then later on with Columbia, I try to mention in my book that Diane was actually, because she did such good work, she was actually hired to be on the task force to look at what happened to Columbia. And she and her panel came up with the same situation, that when a piece of foam was seen to fall down from the Columbia during launch, that they should have made some sort of test or walk through, just spacewalk, and look at the damage to see if they should fly back down. And possibly what they would do is either fly another shuttle up there or somehow get the astronauts back down some other way. So so that could have been done, but it wasn't. And NASA being a highly reliable organization, HRO, should have, with all its, because there was video of it, so it should have been spotted, it should have been taken care of, and that should have happened. That said, and I kind of want to bring this out into my book, is that I want the public to realize that even though the public, and this is the whole world, loves the shuttle program, I wanted them to see that as much as you love this, it was a very dangerous, program, and with 2 fatalities out of 137. I mean, the statistics with that are it's twice and less than 100, and it's just real. I mean, some people, there's another argument that says that that we should be brave no matter what, but at the same time, we have to consider lives and other alternatives. And the other alternative has been, to be honest, the Soyuz. And I know this is Russian, but it's been a very good program. They've had very little flaw in launching their rockets and keeping their astronauts and cosmonauts safe. So you know, you have to take it, you have to learn from what data we have and what we've learned from. Then what's exciting, especially this month, is that, you know, Dragon is going to go up there and you know, on a Falcon rocket, and we're going to find out how that's going to work, and if the U.S. can get back into sending astronauts into space, and not and to be not someone that or not to be a country that does not have easy access for humans to space. So because for so long we haven't been. So it's really good that everything is going the way it's going now.
Yeah, it's interesting how you tie together chapters 4 and 5, no more space shuttle and moving into space stations. Are we
Right.
are we gliding into a new era of something similar to, you know, returning to having space shuttles?
Well, one of the things I remember from space stations, it wasn't something I said, but something that Michael Paul, I think he was not the only one that said that, he was agreed with, and Michael Paul works for Johns Hopkins right now. He used to work for Penn State and worked on the Lunar Lions team for the X Prize Cup, for the, I'm sorry, the Google X Prize Cup to be more specific. He said, you know, that, you know, what's going to happen, and even I think Sean Casey echoed the words, and Sean Casey is from the Silicon Valley Space Center. They both echoed the fact that, you know, the shuttle is so big and provides so much. Who's going to take it? How long are they going to keep funding it? And if they stop funding it, which they plan on doing, I think in a few years from now, I would say 2025 or 2026, 28. I don't know the number, but it's around there. But who's going to foot the bill, and is somebody even going to buy, you know, a football field size, you know, spacecraft that's flying above the Earth, when, like I think I tried to mention, at least in my book, that there are a bunch of other companies out there that are trying to put their own spaceships. So I mean, space stations, I should say. I'm sorry, space stations. So and that's now in COVID. That if that's going to happen, that's really up in the air as well, because I know that Bigelow has closed down operations, but there's still always Axiom. That's the second company that's really trying to build space stations. And I think NanoRacks, I don't know if is too. So the thing is, you have to see if what's going to happen, because Bigelow's basically shut down because of COVID. I don't know about, I haven't followed up on Axiom or NanoRacks, but yeah, I mean the need for a space station, even as we go to the moon with NASA's program, is even more apparent now than ever before.
Yeah, it seems like these are starting to be more exciting times when it comes to the space economy and trips to space. Maybe in some way we are going to revisit that era of the shuttle, because I think space became a lot more, well, not a lot more mainstream, but it was mainstream. Everybody did love the shuttles, and everybody loved hearing about a new shuttle and a new voyage, you know? So my next question is, and I can see my, okay, chapter 6, new space examples. I'd like to read an entry from actually it's from chapter 1, but I want to talk about new space examples. Page 26 to 27. In the midst of the recession, then founder and CEO of XCore, Jeff Greason, who is now the CEO of a company called Electric Sky, explained around late 2008, early 2009, Rocket Racing League withdrew its contract from us, which resulted in me having to lay off half the company on Christmas Eve. Greason continued, it was a tough time to raise money, but we were doing our thing to raise small contracts and doing R&D stuff. But despite the economic climate and the personal losses of the company, Greason pressed on. We did methane engine work for NASA. We worked with a private contractor to work on thrusters, noted Greason. The reason I wanted to read that part from chapter 1 and then go into new space examples, have the opportunities in new space been underappreciated? And do you think now is an opportunity for companies, despite the facing times, the renewed recession? Do you think now is actually an opportunity for the new space economy? Similar to what Greason was saying, where, you know, they pulled themselves up by the bootstraps and they found other ways to make their technology, earn a revenue.
Right. The example from my book that I want to bring out more so than Greason is the example of Jose Mariano Lopez Urdalis, or Mariano Urdalis Lopez. And he's I might be pronouncing his name wrong, but he's the CEO of a company in Barcelona called Zero to Infinity. And that company started in the recession, and they did very well, according to him in my book, that they started in the recession. It was able for them to hang on their bootstraps. The example you gave with Greason and Xcore, they were hurt by the recession and they eventually went bankrupt. So Jose is here for another round. That said, you asked me, what's the recession like now? Is it an opportunity for like people like Jose to start up again? I would say yes, but unfortunately, that's only going to happen for certain reasons. And the reason why is because it's COVID. Most people can't, like, when Jose was starting in a recession in Barcelona, he was able to have access to tools and resources and be able to get out of his house and to ship things back and forth. For things he needed to work in a clean room, that sort of thing. So for someone to start up a space company, I just did a, like, to be honest, I was just asked to be a judge for a competition, an undergraduate competition of papers and posters for a NASA space grant program at Colorado. And a lot of the students had really great projects, but most of them had to stop because of COVID, because the universities were closing down. They didn't have access to share stuff between each other, like be it building a rocket or building a satellite or building solar panels for a satellite or whatever. Everything just basically stopped. So if they're stopping, I'm assuming that if you wanted to do a startup, you would have to be stopping too, which is really unfortunate because, like I said, companies or VCs, when they're looking at places to invest money, if the market's going down, they're going to be looking at someplace else to invest their money that could be going up and could grow. And that's why startups are so prime during recession times. With COVID, though, in the space field, unfortunately, I have to say, unless you could find some way, whether maybe it's tech, meaning like computer-based tech and it's solving a problem there, or biotech and the lab is small, if you could find some way to get your idea across and to get the funding and to get everything you need, it's going to be a whole lot harder during this recession, during this downturn in the economy. It hasn't been called a recession from what I know, but it's felt like it, and I think if people are going to do good during this downturn, they're going to have to somehow work despite distance.
Yeah, I'd like to stay with the NewSpace examples in the face of COVID-19 and how everyone says that this is the new normal. How do commercial space companies, especially the startups, or maybe not even especially the startups, but the space technologies, in many ways, they correlate with the need for those technologies seems to correlate with some of the adjustments that we're having to take place in our economy right now. One thing being decontamination efforts, self-isolation, the concern with surfaces needing to be sanitized, or as you enter and re-enter the space, coming from space and going into space, you have those types of concerns. I mean, what do you see in your opinion? Do you see any correlation?
One of the first articles I read when the whole lockdown started was I forget his first name, but there's the two brothers, the two twins that on the NASA program, was one of the Kellys, and he's like, space, this being in isolation now is just like how I was in isolation in space. And that's very true. But for someone to start a company and to focus on building a space habitat, first of all, they would need the land and they would need the materials to do that. And like I said, the distance to try to bring those materials and have them shipped to you, you know, from some sort of supplier right now, if like if that could happen, like then you'd be able to do some sort of, you know, human factors habitat, you know, somewhere out in it's also, you have to find a place. You couldn't do it in New York City. You would have to do it, you know, somewhere in the desert or in the Badlands of North Dakota or wherever. You know, you'd have to find some way to, or in the maybe in the forest in upstate New York. You know, but the thing is, it would take. You would need to have people deliver stuff for you. They would have to be open, and you, for you to do your work effectively, you would need to have seriously supply. You would have to look at different kind of contractors, supplies. A lot of that could be done on the internet, but to have it delivered to you and to have them be open would be another thing. And also to worry about contamination then, like, you know, think like everything being with touch. Hopefully, you know, if they shipped it to you overnight, like with FedEx, and FedEx does have a space program where they ship things that are space related. You just have to worry about, you know, with touch, like if the COVID virus is going to spread from one place to another through this, you know, thing that's delivered overnight. And I think there's something like, unless you wipe them down with like a Clorox wipe or some sort of disinfectant, you're like, it's going to be 3 days for plastics and cardboard.
That's what I was kind of getting at, was what solutions do you think these commercial space companies can bring, not today as we are in lockdown, but maybe in the months ahead? Do you see from the companies that you're aware of any technologies out there?
One of the things, I mean, the companies that are working right now, because space and defense is now considered are considered essential workers. So if you're working for a company, like let's say the Aerospace Corporation in California, everybody's going to be working. The thing is, they're going to be doing social distancing and things like that. That's to say that they're not experiencing problems outside working in their environment with COVID. You know, if they were to say that we're all fine and there's no gaps in what we're doing, I would seriously disagree with that. That said, we're also in a different age where solutions could be solved a lot more quickly, be that with 3D printing or some sort of other thing. So maybe, or some sort of other technology like AI. So the point of what I'm trying to say is maybe they can solve their problems, but if they're really looking for certain things, and also to do within regulation within the government, it's going to be really hard. So especially I'm thinking, and this is my background in NewSpace Global, I'm always thinking about startups and the VC stuff. So maybe I can't speak for traditional space like the Aerospace Corporation in California. So like, I really don't know how they're managing their stuff because I don't tap into traditional space. But for the startups, it's like, and to start up now, it's just going to be really hard.
I understand. So I guess this takes us to like, based on your historical view, do you have any predictions besides it being difficult moving forward?
It's just going to be difficult for a while, but eventually this will all pass. You know, I do think that eventually, you know, we're going to see a change, and like for example, like there's going to be losses like with OneWeb recently. But there's going to be changes like with Musk and sending Dragon to the space station with two astronauts. That's going to be the positive. And things are going to work out and things are going to progress. It's just not going to be the way that we expected it to be. And there's going to be like what we call in risk analysis, like a black swan. There's going to be things out there that are going to pop up that's going to change the whole thing. But I think more than any other industry, the space industry, especially traditional space, the space industry is more adaptable and can change with the times. I think, and even like, I would say the best of the new space corporations could change as well, because they have a pulse on what's going on as well. And that would be like, with NewSpace Global would be the top 100 that we're tracking. Because to plug NewSpace Global a little bit.
Yeah, that was my last question. I wanted you to tell us more about your work with NewSpace Global.
Well, like we've been, and I wasn't an analyst then, but the first group of analysts that looked at the 700 companies that were being tracked, we did a reevaluation of them, and the top 100 basically stayed in or near the top 100. So that means we were right on track. And within the bottom 100 of the 700, they're either not around now, or there were like 3 or 4 that actually moved up and survived. So we did the people who were before me did a really good job at predicting, you know, where the future of space is going and who could survive as a company, you know, as a startup in the startup sphere. And there were also other companies that went public, or there was lots of buyouts. A lot of these things happened within the past 6 years since the company started. And I said the company may have been started 7 years. I was with the company 6 years. So, but I do analyst work. I look at companies, I rank them, I read articles on them. I try to make sense of them. I try to I edit not white papers, I edit deep dives, they're called, where we look at a particular industry, be it the CubeSat industry, or lunar missions, or asteroid mining, and we focus on that topic, and we find out what are the pluses and minuses, the costs, the things that you have to be aware about, what could go wrong, that sort of thing. But a lot of it is all startup focused. Like, and I have to apologize. Like, if I'm offending traditional space right now, I don't know a lot about you guys, but and maybe for good reason too. So, but looking at this, and the startup community is fun. I mean, there's a lot of change, and I know traditional space needs the startup community too, and relies on them for change. But it's like to see space grow, and to see these small companies survive and even stay on their own, even without, you know, going public. The work that they do, even though that's not what we focus on, we kind of focus on them as a company first and how they manage their company first. But looking at the work that they do, it's amazing.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us today, David. We've enjoyed learning more about your book. And can you tell us about where we can find it?
Yes, you could find more about my book on either Amazon or Barnes & Noble or most local booksellers. Again, I would type in my name, David Bullock. Again, the title of the book, which is 2008 to 2018, A NewSpace Primer. I know the book is available in electronic format and both paperback and hardcover.
Great. Thank you again.